Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Vicky, for introducing. I'm super excited to share this new Pathways game with you. So as Vicky mentioned, the session today is split into two distinct parts. The first hour we're going to dedicate to introducing the game. So that will be explaining the theory behind it, walking you through the game elements and the play, hearing from people who have played it. So we've got two case studies to talk you through. And we're going to leave a good chunk at the end for questions and answers. The second part is far more interactive. We've left 45 minutes for that. So we're going to experience one small dynamic of the game. So if you want to stay, then yes, it'd be really nice to have you. So I want to say, first of all, a really big thank you to the good investors who funded the development of this game, and also to Twist and to Transcap, who tested the game during the development with us. So yeah, the game, Seeds of the Future, Creating Pathways to a Better World, has been created from the DT theory, and teams basically strive to create long-term pathways towards sustainable and just futures. It's really a game for people who are looking for new tools for strategic reflection, for those who want to break out of habitual approaches and unlock different ways of seeing the systems that they're trying to change. Now, the focus is not so much on getting it right or wrong, but rather to collectively explore the challenges, the trade-offs, and also the complexities of building long-term visions for sustainability. And I don't need to tell you all this, but our world is not a stable one. Conflict, health crises, political and economic collapse. These are all powerful shocks that disrupt our systems and also our planning towards our intended pathways. But these shocks can also create windows of opportunity for transformative change. And this is just one of the elements that the game explores. And it's also something that we're going to explore in an interactive part of the session today. So over the years of deep transitions research, it's really clear that transforming systems requires new ways of imagining what's possible. So we have developed, my screen is not wanting to go. There we go. We have developed the game to help players foster creative thinking and also open up their imaginations to deepen their understanding of sustainability pathways. So instead of treating change as linear, the game does reveal its messy interplay of the new emerging, shocks disrupting, and consequences unfolding. We also want to disrupt habitual patterns of behaviour. Teams really are forced to break out of routines, negotiate trade-offs, and experiment together. We also want to surface insights that other tools might miss. So as I've said, we really do focus on shocks, consequences of actions taken, trends, and landscape shifts. Now, these are real-world dynamics that affect future plans, and we need to interact with them if we're going to get a better understanding of how to create resilient pathways. And then the last point there is to create a shared language and direction for teams. The game makes the complexity of long-term transitions tangible and playable. And instead of just discussing systems change, like a lot of us spend time doing, the idea is that players really do get to experience it. So they experience its friction, its uncertainty, but also its creativity and opportunities. Some of the feedback we've had so far is that it helps people shift their perspectives on what change actually requires, helps them to recognise their role or their own sector's role in that can play a part, generating ideas of how to build resilient pathways, creating a collaborative environment where you get to hear other people's perspectives. It is also fun. It's fun to play. So yeah, we designed the game also to be completely flexible. So as a facilitator, if you're facilitating this game, you can really adapt it to any context and any locality. There's a physical board game and there's also an online version of the game. We will, at the end of the first hour, link to that online version if you want to go and check it out. So now I'm going to hand over to Phil Johnston. He is a researcher with the DT Lab and yeah, worked on the game development together. So Phil, I will hand over to you.
Okay, hello there, and I hope you can all hear me okay. And it's really great to be here and see so many faces here after the development of the game. And Natalie's talked about the game and its purpose and its role in stimulating creativity and fun. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the background to this because it's based on research using the Deep Transitions framework and from the Deep Transitions project. I'm just going to talk a bit about that. And as you probably know, the Deep Transitions framework was conceived by Professor Johan Scott and Professor Lara Kanga, with key publications back in 2018, really investigating uh, long-term socio-technical change and the rise of industrial modernity, understanding this in a particular way in terms of the evolution of socio-technical systems that underpin different societal needs that we all depend on: energy, food, mobility, and so on, and how over a period of time these systems become shaped in a particular direction. And that first deep transition of industrial modernity that we all live with today uh, became based around certain things such as linear production, a dependence on fossil fuels, focus on efficiency in production, and so on. And of course, this created incredible transformations, which did see rise in living standards and other benefits in certain parts of the world and widespread economic growth. However, as we all know, this came at a cost, and there was negative outcomes that we are all seeing today, and maybe what is called the polycrisis, the intersecting crises that we see today around biodiversity loss, climate change, inequality, and so on. So, with that in mind, as we stand at this moment, at the culmination of the first deep transition in industrial modernity, we need to shift away towards a second deep transition to transform industrial modernity to move towards an entirely different, sustainable future. And this is, of course, a momentous undertaking because, as we all know, this needs to happen at a faster rate than the Industrial Revolution originally did over 250 years because of the crises of climate change and so on. So DT, Deep Transitions, offers a tools, theoretical, conceptual tools for understanding how to build such change and the kind of interventions we need to do for this change. And a lot of this is based on we've done a lot of, and hopefully we can link to various research outputs in further communications. This is based around a lot of historical work. So we look at the past to think about the future. And just to give one example, we've got a paper coming out imminently in the next few days on the history of digitalization. So we're all used to the idea that we live in a world dominated by digital technologies. The meeting we're having today is possible because computers are talking to each other across distance. Now, in the 1950s, the ideas of a universal computer speaking to other computers across distance was a marginal idea that existed only in the single system of the US defense system, in the ARPANET and the Cold War establishments. Over time, through evolutionary processes, it has come to shape the entirety of society. So we understand the mechanisms behind that change to help us understand how we move forward. We have different papers that examine things to do with thinking about the future and future worlds, interventions, and this conceptual framework is what was the ingredients or the toolkit for the Deep Transitions game. And part of the game is using these concepts in a fun and lively way to think about how we can stimulate change towards sustainability using the different components. And we've trialed this game out with policymakers, with students, with investors, and I personally have really been amazed by how it does spark different ways of thinking uh, about things that maybe we don't think about in our day to day when we're locked into our day to day roles. It allows us to step outside of this and really think big picture strategically, but it's a very practical thing as well. And I think now, Natalie, are we going to go for a tour
We
of these
are.
different components? So Natalie's going to guide us around the board. Thank you, Natalie.
So
And
this is the online board version that you can find in our resource hub.
yeah, we're starting with the future worlds. And so this is the starting point. When we set out on our journey on Pathways, when we're playing our game, we're heading towards 2055 from the present. A crucial thing is we need to know about where we want to go. And this is important because there's multiple sustainable futures, and it's important to have a vision. And it's important to think about how we can move towards a desirable world. Certainly, in the times we live in, you can really understand why it's important to have imagination to think of something better that is more sustainable. And people talk about this a lot. You hear, I saw the Belgian Prime Minister quoting Antonio Gramsci a couple of days ago that we live in the time of monsters, and there's a phrase often used about it's easier to imagine the end of the world than imagine the end of unsustainable capital. So imagining a better world is crucial. And I think when you look at things like net zero for 2050, these kind of things, they're somewhat of an illusion because they can give the portrayal that we're going to have this momentous change, but it's kind of going to be like the world we live in now, but with low carbon things. On the contrary, everything's going to change. The values, our daily practices, our routines, our institutions. So how can we imagine these worlds? What would they feel like? What would they seem like? And we have archetypes of three different worlds um, to do this. And one of these is the Earthshot world, which is a high-tech, ambitious, technology-focused world of innovation, large-scale technological solutions, coordinated globalization, reminiscent of the moonshot missions of the past, and this would be a particular sustainable world. And then we have a do no harm world that really focuses on an entirely new balance between biodiversity and human flourishing. There's a strong role for public institutions. And we also have a sufficiency world where we really see a focus on behavioral change, localized solutions, decentralized technologies, a new good life where limitless consumption is no longer the order of the day. There are limits, but this enables us to value different things, communities and local and slow living. So these are ways, of course, we know that there's many, the number of worlds are in a sense infinite, but these are archetypes that allow us to begin this imaginary process within the confines of the game. And the next thing we need to consider is the roles. So if we think about this, in deep transitions, we're thinking about socio-technical systems, and these are energy, food, and mobility. And there is no one actor that is guiding or in control of these systems. Agency is distributed. There's the public, there's not NGOs, there's finance, there's policymakers. There's many different actors that are involved in intervening to shape this system. So, as part of the game, and we're going to talk about interventions a bit later, we think about, okay, well, what would an investor do? What would a policymaker do? What would an NGO do? How can we all contribute to intervening to build a sustainable pathway? And now we go on to the niches, because we know where we're going. We know our future world in 2055. So the next question is, how do we get there? And the starting point for that, where we start with, is niches. And in DT theory, these are sustainable, innovative spaces in different socio-technical systems that provide new rules and a new direction that challenges the dominant unsustainable trajectory. So that trajectory being the what I've just described, industrial modernity based around fossil fuels, centralization, and the rest of it. These are innovative, sustainable solutions that challenge that. And whether it's community-owned renewables, plant-based meat, biodiversity corridors, these are ways of beginning the journey towards our future world. And we want to support and intervene to build resilience around these niches, to connect these niches to other systems as we build our pathway. And this is where interventions come in. Interventions are really about how do we get from these niches to a future world? What can we do to intervene to do that? How can we start moving along our pathway? And we do this through intervention points. And these are played at different stages of the game. We have interventions to support and nurture niches, because a big challenge with niches is that they operate around different rules than the dominant system. So often this means that niches will appear from the perspective of the dominant system to be too expensive or technologically impossible and these kind of things. An example here is, again, renewables. So if you have an electricity system that for decades is based around large centralized fossil fuel nuclear plants that are constantly producing a continual level of electricity, and you have markets designed around that, infrastructures designed around that, renewables that are based around flexible, variable demand will seem too expensive and so on, but they're not really. You can change market rules, you can change infrastructures, and these technologies can play a role, but they need to be supported and nurtured to do that. So we intervene to do that. But we also need to do something about the unsustainable and stubborn system as well. So we have rules to destabilize that, whether it's through phase out policies or taxes. And we also intervene to create resilience across multiple systems and build links between niches in one system with another system. For example, coupling renewable energy with the food system through agrivoltaics, for example. And over time, you start getting multiple system change. And we also have other interventions to deal with consequences and scaling up, which brings me to the next one, which is the consequences. Because what I've just described sounds all quite nice and simple in a way. We've got our future world, we've got our niches, and we intervene, and we get to our future world. But of course, things are not so simple. And one of the ways they're not so simple is that change is not linear, and conflict is an inherent part of socio-technical change often. There's challenges emerge. And one of these, again, we don't need a reminder of it, is populism and backlash against sustainability transitions. Think about the tractors in the streets in Europe and so on, and the concerns around employment, these kind of things. And we need to think about how we can navigate these tensions, or even better, anticipate them, these rebound effects and so on. So how can we intervene to deal with that? And then we move on to another thing that we have to navigate, which is shocks. And these are moments that are a rupture in the normal environment in which our pathway is being shaped. So think about sudden climate events, wars. Think about, perhaps, I'm just trying to imagine something here, a very powerful leader threatening to invade a sovereign country and putting huge tariffs up, for example. These are things that happen, and they can rapidly change the conditions that we're in, and we have to respond to them. Now, the important thing is these are often disruptive moments, but they can also be moments that are windows of opportunity where particular solutions might have a strategic opening to take advantage of this moment. So a supply chain disruption is terrible. But also, if you are looking to develop community-oriented solutions, then suddenly a new demand emerges for those solutions because of this disruption. So windows of opportunity can open up. And this brings us to the other thing, which is trends. And these are longer term changes in the environmental background landscape that shape the actions that we take. They don't determine them, but they make some things harder and some things easier. Again, unfortunately, it's very easy to understand this concept the times that we're living in. For decades, the landscape was about an international rule-based order, neoliberalism, these kind of things. And anyone that has heard or watched Mark Carney's speech at Davos, for example, would understand that many people are thinking now that landscape has changed somehow, that we're in a different kind of era. Everyone's talking about it. So how do we manage and deal with that and still try and build towards a sustainable pathway within that? So overall, this is a toolkit that I've just outlined. These are the component parts of the game, and they're based on Deep Transition's work. And what they allow is to imagine a better future, but also engage with the full complexities of systems change. And the hope is that new ideas can emerge, new collaborations can be fostered. And I've seen this for myself really in the playing of the game. And if we just, I think now, Natalie, we could just have a quick look at
Yeah, we've got
the
5 minutes, so we can have a quick look at how the play happens. And
yeah.
just to point out with this board, both with the physical game and the online game, this is totally customizable. We've given you a starter pack full of niches and shocks and trends, but you're able to, once you get to know the game and understand it, be able to create your own, so you can fully customize it to the problems that you're trying to solve or what you're trying to think through. So yes, we can go to the board and have a look at how the gameplay actually unfolds.
Great. So now don't the cards, we just put a few cards down just to indicate as placeholders. So you don't need to really pay much attention here. The purpose of just showing you this is uh the the evolution and the sequence of the game. So you can see the different parts. So you can see that there's different rounds in the game. And the first round, each round has a different theme based on the intervention points. And in reality, intervention points, you're doing them all often. You have to be thinking about them. But for the purposes of the game, we have a sequence here. Now, in the first round, we're looking at building the future, and that's where we look at our niches and we look at intervention points to nurture these niches or intervention points to destabilize the prominent regime. And again, these can be all kinds of things because it depends on the role you're playing. And we really emphasize again that there's no right or wrong answer. This is about thinking together about the kinds of things that a policymaker, an NGO, a finance actor could do to support niches. And we have our consequence there, and you can see that it is about this people writing ideas down, dealing with that backlash that happens, thinking together about, okay, well, what would we do if there was this populist backlash? What could be done to alleviate these concerns and manage them? And in round two, we really look at that coordination and building resilience across multiple systems. How can we link systems together? Energy, food, mobility, communications. How can we strategically look at ways of fostering a shared direction through interventions? And we also have a shock there that comes in, and then the teams have to respond to that. That can often quite radically change the pathway we're on. But as I mentioned, it can also be a window of opportunity. And then in the third round, we're really looking at a new world in the sense that we introduce a trend that's often linked to the shock, because one consequence of shocks is that they don't just disappear, they are imprinted onto a more permanent change in the landscape. And we also look at scaling up and initiatives that you could do once the things accelerating. And, this is very pertinent. I mean, again, using the renewables example, we've seen incredible cost reductions in renewables beyond any expectation. I just saw today that renewables has overtaken fossil fuels in the EU with a considerable share being provided by solar. But what is missing is infrastructure. So there's big problems with connections and interconnections, and there's blockages in the system. So to accelerate the renewables, you have to somehow get finance into the infrastructure of renewables, not just the downstream technology. So that's a thing to think about, and we do that scaling up and accelerating in that round. And usually the board would be filled with many more cards. We're just showing you basically the outline of the board, but that's a quick guide to how it looks. And remember, we have obviously a cards and a real world version as well that we've played with various people. So anyway, I'm looking forward to talking more about this and engaging further with you.
Thank you. So yes, we now have time to hear from two people that have actually played the game. So I'm going to invite them to, 5 minutes each to talk a little bit about their experience of the game. So first of all, Gilberto Gomez Munoz, if you can, spend 5 minutes to talk about your experience and introduce yourself first, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Phil, for the invitation. My name is Gilberto Gomez. I'm a PhD researcher at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. Before I started my PhD, I was 4 years and a half at the National Secretariat of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Panama. And in my last role, I led a new office that was in charge of linking the scientific knowledge and public policies, and more specifically, the design, implementation, and innovation policy. And one of the projects that I used to lead was the implementation of transformative innovation policy in Panama. We did this, we are doing like in Senate, but with the collaboration of Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium. And one of we did a workshop in Panama last year. We invited Phil, that was facilitator from the Transition Lab. It was a workshop of 2 days. And the main objective of the workshop, using the seeds of the future game, was first to explore plausible pathways for Panama to become more sustainable at 2050, and second, to strengthen the skills and knowledge of policymakers and practitioners in order to they can become more like system builders and, let's say, not like a passive role in the ecosystem. So I would say that more specifically, the game like aim to promote creative and system thinking to explore future worlds, more sustainable future worlds for Panama, and to identify promising niches innovation that could be applied in the Panamanian context, and how to identify policies and actions that could help to achieve those future worlds. So it was very interesting. We have 2 days workshop, as I mentioned. The first one was with most of all policymakers, more than 40 people, and the second day we have with business associations and with NGOs. And the main results, I would say that, for example, I feel that the game helped to build a strong awareness among policymakers. They started to realize that they are more like system shapers, that they have agency to influence in order to create more sustainable futures, and to do it in a coordinated way. Sometimes one of the problems in the public sector is the coordination problem, like agency within the public sector doesn't talk to each other. So that helped a lot to think in a system way and how we can achieve better futures. Also, as I mentioned before, the identification of strategic niches that could be applied in the Panamanian context, that was very important. Also, I would say these kind of games help to create more creative thinking. and that's helped also for the state to develop anticipatory skills. So just like let's say that you have the skills to anticipate futures. Phil mentioned like shocks and possible consequence of, like we are seeing right now, consequence in all the world, but you can be prepared like a public institution to those scenarios, you know. And to finalize, I will say that in Senacid, I feel that it helped a lot because Senacid is an ecosystem builder. Senacid like tries to create relationship between institutions in the innovation policy, and it is very important that Senacid creates a directionality in the public policy in order to achieve more sustainable future. So that's one of the things that this game also helps public policymakers. So that's all. Thank you very much. And if you have any question, please let me know. I can send you an email, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilberto. Yes, so for the Q&A, you can direct your questions at somebody you've heard from. So Gilberto, or our next speaker is Alexandra Carine. She is from Twist. And yeah, I'll hand over to you, Ali, to have your 5 minutes to discuss the game. Thank you.
Sure, happy to. Well, good to see you all. My name is Ali Carine, and I'm the co-managing director of Twist, which is a collective of investors, facilitators, and enablers for systems change that are actively busy trying to create systems change within sort of investor lens. And I got to be one of the guinea pigs on this game, which was really, really fun. I'd love to bring this to some of our investor communities, including Twist and some of the other ones I'm connected to. Mostly because I feel like it really, I mean, Phil, you already beautifully walked us through the whole game, which I was going to mention some of these things, but like, I think for me, what was really interesting was to, like, typically when you create a strategy, whether it's you create a whole beautiful systems change strategy and you go through the whole initial visioning and an idea about strategy and how you want to bring that to be. Sorry, one second. Horrible timing. Sorry about that. And then in this game, what is really fun is there's the shocks, right? And that's so real in today's world. We constantly face shocks, differences. It can be huge global shocks in the system, but it can also be regional or local shocks. And I think too often we stay course. We stay on our strategy, we stay in our a beautiful vision that we've developed. And instead, I think this game really invites you to think through, okay, the shock happened. This is the role I play within the system. How would I respond to this? How would I maybe pivot my strategy? How would I go about this differently? And I think what also occurred to me while playing this game is how it differs by role. So some roles you might actually stay course, and other roles you might actually pivot because there's a different strategy that makes more sense to respond to that shock. So I think it's just a beautiful invitation to, really work with the reality of the world as it exists and how we are all invited to really keep adapting, changing as the system continues to evolve and continues to change. And particularly from, I guess I'm speaking from the investor community, how we adapt as investors, the strategy to maybe support different interventions or support that intervention in a different way to actually bring about the intended change. So I'd say it's a really fun game and I think beautifully adaptable according to different situations, as already outlined also by Gilberto, which was nice. So yeah, that was it.
Thank you so much, Ali. Really appreciated. So yes, we've got time for a nice chunk of time for a Q&A now. So feel free to direct your questions, or I can direct them. You can ask a question directly to Ali or to Gilberto, or of course Phil. We also have Johan Scott, the director of the DT Lab here, who can answer questions, and Dana Velasco, who's head of our experimentation and deputy director of the DT Lab. So we've got full cast to be able to answer all those questions. I will also share the Mentimeter now, actually. It's shared in the meeting chat. I'll just put up the QR code for everyone to be able to see if that's useful. So Vicky, you'll be having a look at our Mentimeter. Are there any questions that you can see coming through that we can start answering? And we'll attempt to answer as many questions as possible, but we may not get around to them all.
Thanks, Natalie. Yes, there's a few questions that have come in. Maybe to start, somebody has highlighted that obviously the development of this has come out of Northern Europe, and have you given consideration to how it might be used in other countries, particularly in the Global South?
Phil, maybe this would be a good, we talked about this a lot during the game development, so this might be a good one for you to answer.
Yeah, sure. It's a great question, and this was a key consideration as we went along, and the feedback that we gathered along the way. And actually, I remember in Panama, someone come saying to me that look, some of these niches, it's just not realistic to the context we're in, because it's not that there isn't necessarily that similar kind of amount of capital for R&D or whatever. So what we've done as we went along is we've made sure where possible to have a diversity of niches that cover a broad range of practice changes as well. So not just technological things. But another key thing about this is the game design itself, in that we ensure that there's many blank cards, and that it's modular in the sense that people can come up with their own niches and they can tailor it to their own context. So we really feel that the way it's been designed in this latest iteration means that it can be adapted to a variety of contexts, and we've really taken a lot of feedback on board about that as we've gone along. So it's a great point, but I think hopefully the way we've designed it now, it means it's accessible and relevant to diverse geographical contexts.
Any other questions that look interesting, Vicky?
Okay, so another question is around, I think I'm understanding this correctly, that does the game address the undoing of the unsustainable ways of doing things, as well as the building of new sustainable ways?
Yes, yeah, I think actually, Diana, if you want to speak to this point, it very much the game draws on DT theory, and there's two elements of that. But yeah, Diana, if you want to speak to this.
Well, I would say that there are some intervention points that are directed towards regime destabilization, and also, well, that would be a bit of the undoing, but also the ones related to landscape, kind of looking at rebound effects and addressing broader repercussions. So in that sense, although the game starts with niches and how the niches can you start building them and then kind of put in interventions to make them flourish and to get stronger. You can also have, depending on your role, some actions, interventions related to pervasive effects of current socio-technical systems. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, Phil, if you want to speak to that point, or if you want to add anything, please feel free to.
No, I think Diana's covered it well.
Vicky, any more questions?
Yeah, so another couple of questions that sort of relate to a similar thing is how grounded in reality is it, is essentially the question. So one question around, we've got 3 desirable worlds. Sorry, hang on a second. And is that too limited? And then the other question around, how connected is this to the real world if you're playing this game? Maybe
Yeah, I
the
think
two kind
Phil,
of taken together.
if you speak to that, it's something that I know that has come up before. So yes, if you're able to answer that, that'd be great.
Certainly, yeah. And another useful question. And there's two parts to this, I think, that I'd like to address. One is about the future worlds. And indeed, there's three future worlds. And of course, and we emphasize this point that the future is open. There's a plurality of worlds. There's many different potential worlds. There'll be a mix of features of the worlds, possibly. But the key thing here is that it's a game. So we want to, and in a game, you need certain limitations as structuring devices to play the game. Otherwise, it kind of is not a workable game anymore. And the other thing is that with these future worlds, a lot of research and collaboration in the Deep Transitions Futures panel went into this to co-produce these worlds with a panel of investors and really try and reflect a diversity of features within these worlds. But of course, we underpin that there's other worlds that can be created and people can shape their own worlds in their own activities and so on. But it's a useful archetype. They're archetypes that allow us an entry point into that process of thinking about the future world. And the other thing about the real world and is it useful? I really what I like about this is that a few years ago, when we were starting out about this world, one of the things people said that wasn't so realistic was about the shocks. So we were coming up with things like wars and invasion, and people were saying, yeah, but unfortunately, that's not so unrealistic anymore. So I think in a way it's a little sad, but it's also relevant that I think the components of this game are now more relevant and more practical than ever. We used to have models thinking about scenarios that were quite nice and they were linear and they were going to 2055 and there was a few bumps in the road, but there wasn't shocks, really. There wasn't wars, these kind of things. And in today's world, I don't think you can operate for a sustainable future without considering all of these elements within your strategic thinking. So I'd say it's absolutely relevant for sort of real world activities. And it allows, hopefully, new solutions to emerge in the real world activities. So through engagement, through talking to each other, through playing the game, ideas emerge that would not emerge within the confines of our usual day-to-day roles. And that's the hope.
Thank you. Yes, any more questions or anything interesting you're seeing coming up, Vicky? I can also see there's stuff going on in the chat as well.
Yes, I can see there's a question from Ian around whether the game starts with an implicit or explicit initial intended pathway, which I'm not sure I quite understand, but if it's not clear to the contributors, then maybe Ian can elaborate.
I think that I gave in the chat kind of an answer from my perspective to Ian.
So should I come in?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess my interest comes from I'm working on a project that started from the initial socio-technical framing, but very much building on Johan and Larkanger work on sort of the transformation in the sort of value systems and so on. Now, the project that I'm working on now very much encompasses much broader global cultural change, things like changes in religious, in values and gender values and in education and so on. So much broader than socio-technical. So when I'm watching this, I'm just thinking it would be great fun to disrupt the game right at the very beginning by challenging the underlying sort of initial premise of the narrative of transformation. So I hope I'm not being too disruptive with the question.
Dana or Phil, I think please feel free to sort of jump in here.
Shall I? Yeah. Thanks, Ian. It's always good to have a disruption. So thank you. It's a good challenge. And what I would say is there's a couple of things. To your original question about is there a intended pathway? Well, there is in the sense that you select a future world that you want to aim for, but then of course the pathway is contingent on consequences, shocks. So, we emphasize there's agency, but you're not in control. No one's in control of a pathway. So the pathway isn't set, but you are aiming like a goal for a future world. But then things happen along the way. And about your question about the cultural aspects, uh, very good points. And I think it's incredibly important that we think about cultural transformation in general. And often, like our digitalization paper shows, culture moves can move first. You look at the counterculture and decentralized computing and so on. The dominant computing business was saying computers aren't going to be used for creativity tools. They're going to be business machines. And it was the hobbyists and the countercultural people that saw otherwise. So cultural transformation is very important. But what we do include is socio-technical systems are multidimensional. So this is important to emphasize that yes, there's technology, but there's business and industry, policy, markets, and culture. So when we're talking about rules, we consider all of these dimensions. So technology is never just technology alone. It is a seamless web of other dimensions. It's shaped by cultural change, by business and industry, by these things. So I think there's room in the game to look at cultural interventions and to the kind of things you're pointing towards. And I think also in round three, we have a sort of a tilting the landscape intervention. And there we can start looking at broader change in the landscape, which can also relate to deeper values and cultural shifts. So I would hope and see what you think. I hope you get a chance to play it, and then you can come back and we can talk about whether you think it's adequately dealt with these things. But I think it's a great point. So thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Ian. Yes, Vicky, I can see there's some more questions in the chat, or if there's anything in the Mentimeter, what are you thinking?
So from Melanie in the Netherlands, I think this question is maybe quite important for a few people in that how can you play it? So there's the Miro version. Can you say something about the other version and if there's any other plans for a web-based version? Okay, Cynthia's mentioned about the physical copy of the game, for example, and
yes, I'm just answering that. So yeah, in terms of accessing the game, so at the moment we have the physical game board. I will send the email. You can talk to me. I'll send the email in the chat now if you want to get hold of that. So that is a physical game board with the cards. The cards have been made so there are blank cards for every type of niches, shocks. So you can, again, like I've said, fully customize it. So that's available. And then we also have an online version. And at the moment that sits in a Miro board. There isn't additional web or AI integration. It's in a Miro board at the moment. But yes, who knows for the future? But those are the ways in which you can access and play it right now.
Thanks. And there's another question from Beryl as well, and how the game can be translated to further agent-based modelling for socio-technical interventions.
Yes.
Maybe I was replying now. Well, the game, when we created the game, we did it first with a base of practice in the Deep Transitions Lab with investors. So we used the components to think together on how you could understand the world around you, what is your position in changing the world, and what can you do along at least a 30 years process. So in that moment, we had already the blocks that you were seeing today, but we were applying it to their own cases and what were their role in the process of change. Now, this version of the game is intended to ignite action and creativity in players. So it provides the elements with the framing that we have from the transitions world of what the current pathways are, what you can do along the process, and then it's intended to provide tools for like very practical tools for the action of the people that can use it in their own context. So yeah, basically it's a starter, but the modeling is more something that it would follow the action after playing the game or using the elements, and we would be happy to hear your experiences playing it.
Thank you, Diana. And yes, I'm just having a look through to see, Vicky, if there's anything else. We've got
Yes, so we've got a cluster. Sorry, so we've got a cluster of questions. They seem to be organised into two parts. So one is around sort of how long does it take practically if people want to do this with people, how long they should allow. And there's also a few questions that relate to the learning or the behavioural change or the outcomes or competencies that are developed through the game. So I don't know if somebody might be able to help with those two.
I can speak to the first one. We tend to say it is very much dependent. So you can set aside, we put timings in, which are between an hour and a half and 2 hours to play the game. You can get it down to an hour and a half. You could, and the timings are there within the game manual of how long you should spend on each section. However, we always find that the best bit of the game are the conversations that you start to have. So you can set aside half a day to play this and really explore those questions that are coming up. So it very much depends on the time you have and how, what you want to get out of the game. So nice and quicker and far longer if you need. And sorry, Vicky, I have totally blanked on the second question because I was totally focused on the first.
I think maybe to summarize, what would be the outcomes for people playing it, I suppose. What are you noticing in the lab?
Yeah, I mean, Phil, we've played this quite a lot now with a diverse range of people. What do you feel that that's coming out of it? And I can also speak to this question too.
Yeah, sure. I think, and our two, Alexandra and Gilberto, I think, touched on some of this in terms of the value. And I remember in an early version of the game, and Diana and Pipashi were leading it there with the good investors it was. I remember a distinct moment which to me crystallizes the value of the game. And what happened was the investors that were playing the game, we were looking at wider the consequences, the things like back unemployment and backlash. And at the beginning of the game, the investors said, well, there's nothing we can do about these things because it's not in our remit. And the interesting thing was that as we went along, you could see the thinking changing. And what I mean by that is the thinking changed from the thinking that we all do, that we think about our specific role, usually short-term targets, these kind of things. And it changed to thinking about a system. And that actually, if, for example, an investment is to be successful in the long term, then in actual fact, thinking about consequences and repercussions and these kind of things in a systemic sense is vital. So to me, it changes the time horizon that that we all are usually thinking about. And I think this is particularly pertinent in how we measure impact, for example, which usually looks at change in the next 5 years. How much emissions reduction can you get in the next 5 years? Well, for systems change, we need to think longer term. We need to think strategically. So it changes the time period. It changes the breadth of how we think. As I say, we start stepping outside of that quite confined role to thinking in systemic terms. And also, as Gilberto highlighted, the shocks are really important. I think for a long time, we have been accustomed to kind of not thinking so much about this. And that was a real important moment, I think, in Panama. And people they said, we do not usually think about these things in our day-to-day life and our work because there isn't the space to. So, but they're essential to think about. So it is that. And as Victoria says, exactly that, understanding our circle of influence and changes in that. So it does it in terms of the time period, the systems change, and also I think really importantly the shocks thing. And so I think and I've seen that for myself.
Yeah, I think one observation for me from watching lots of different groups play is that, of course, you're learning about DT theory and how to apply that and how you can think about systems change and building pathways. But also there's a lot of second order learning that goes on. And for me, it's really in those conversations that get people thinking in a very different way, not only about pathways and how to build them, but also their day jobs. And I think one of the things about the game is that we have roles. And so you pick a role. And so often we encourage people, don't pick, if you are a policymaker, don't pick the policymaker role, pick another role. So it's very much an exercise in opening up the imagination. And enabling you to shift your perspective and think about a challenge in a different way and find new ways into dealing with that challenge. I know there is more going on. However, we have reached our hour's time. So I'm sorry that I haven't managed to get around to all of those questions. But if you leave it in the chat, we'll endeavour to get round to them as we go through the next part. So please pop your questions in the chat. So now we're finishing part one. We're going to be moving on to part two. So a big thank you for joining if you're going to leave us here. So if you are keen to try out the game, you can, of course, find it on the Resource Lab, or I've left the Deep Transitions email in the chat if you want to order a copy. Before we say goodbye to everyone, I do want to introduce you to our next session in February. It's all about tackling youth involvement in crime with transformative innovation. So David is actually putting a link to that now in the chat. So if you're interested in that, please sign up. And we'll look forward to seeing you in February. So part two is all about an interactive element that shows you how one of the concepts and one of the dynamics in the game works. So please only stay if you do want to fully engage and interact with us. We will be asking for everyone's cameras to be on. The session really is about being together, working together, and being fully present. We will be asking people to participate in group work. If there is a reason that you can't have your camera on, please just explain that to your group and be as present as you can via audio. That would be great. So I am going to explain the first exercise now. During this exercise, as I said, you're going to experience a small component of the game, and it'll give you just a taster of how one of the elements works. It's very much narrowed and simplified, but it will give you a taster of how one of the elements works. So what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to present you with one of the future worlds. So that's what you're aiming towards, the goal of all your actions. We're then going to present you with a niche. And in DT theory, a niche is an existing or new space in which a set of alternative practices can flourish. which is not currently dominant in society at the moment. So once we presented these, you're going to be separated into small breakout groups. In these groups, you have 10 minutes to think about the interventions that you would do to establish the niche that you have. In the game, as we've said, we talk a lot about the roles that we use. So do feel that you can use these roles to think about the kinds of actions you might take. So when we're talking about interventions, I thought it'd be useful to give you example of some of the interventions you could do. So for example, if you had the niche community supported agriculture, as a policymaker, one of the examples you could do would be to introduce policies that support community supported agriculture through startup grants or tax incentives. As an investor, you might provide capital or blended finance to farms or cooperatives. You could also, in other roles, do promotional campaigns, you could lobby, you could help change the culture and public opinion. As a university, you might conduct research or an education program. So after we've done this, we're going to come back into the room and I'm going to ask everyone to write in the chat some of the interventions they came up with so we can all discuss them. Please be aware that there's, again, no wrong answers. It's really just meant to be fun and a creative exploration that sort of fires up our imaginations now. And the idea for this is just really to have good conversations. So you don't have to have an answer, just bounce off your group, chat around it. And just all we ask you is to decide who's going to report back in the messages. And again, it can be interventions or it can be reflections or it can be just part of a fragment of the conversation that you were having that was interesting. So it can be really wide and broad. It's just getting those conversations going. So I'm going to hand over to Phil, who's going to introduce you to the future world and to the niche that you have. And as I have these up on my screen, please feel free to take a photograph of them so that you can remember them when you're in the breakout groups.
Okay. Well, thank you, Natalie. And so for the purposes of discussion and engagement, we're just going to go with the sufficiency world. So that's our target. And this is a frugal, local and slow world. It values seasonal nutritious food, staying within planetary boundaries. It's localized, relying on nearby renewable energy sources, innovation that's guided by limits and a shared responsibility, in this case for growing food. And so that's just a flavor of the kind of, it'd be a very different world to our current one, of course, in terms of the food system and linear production and all the rest of it. And the niche, what seems a promising starting point now for heading towards this slower, more frugal, more local food production is something called community supported agriculture. And this is a model of farming and food distribution, connecting farmers directly with consumers. So, for example, people can subscribe to receive and share some of the farm's harvest, paying up front for a season's worth of produce. This helps the farmer cover costs in the season, receiving fresh seasonal produce. And the thing here is, it's more than a transaction. It's a partnership that redistributes the risks and rewards of farming between producers and consumers. So quite often tied to social justice. And there's examples, there's Soul Farm UK, the Black Church Food Security Network in the USA, Brooklyn Grange in the USA. There's various niche examples around. So this is just to say, a kind of a real thing. So what you're doing is, how would you intervene to help this niche flourish? And just have a conversation about, if you're a policymaker, an investor, and a business owner, NGO, how could you support this? But as Natalie says, the key thing, we don't have time to play the actual game. This is just to kind of explore one particular aspect of it. So just feel free to enjoy the conversation, or you could talk about how it might relate to your own work or anything that comes up, just have a chat and engage with this, and then we'll come back into the main room and have a summary of the conversations that we've had. So hopefully that's clear enough. And Natalie, I think back to you.
Yep. So Dana, if you can start putting people into their breakout groups, that would be super helpful. Thank you. And yeah, we'll see you all back in a few minutes. Almost have everyone back in the room. I think we do. So I hope that was interesting and enjoyable for everyone. So if everyone could just pop just a couple of reflections in the chat, just one person from each group, or however you want to split it up, could just pop some reflections in the chat that Phil can use to start having a think about some of the conversations and the interventions that came up. And Phil, I know that you were in a breakout room, so perhaps we've got a couple of minutes now to reflect on what we just did. So Phil, perhaps you could talk a little bit about what your group covered while everyone else starts to put their conversations in the chat. And yeah, if we see those coming in, we can try to discuss some of those elements.
Sure, I could, but I wonder, Juliana, if you might want to, but not to put you on the spot. I'm happy to. It's up to you. But
no problem, I can.
People have heard enough from me, so I thought maybe Juliana might be great. So thank you.
Yeah, sure. I had an amazing conversation with both with Phil and Caleb. We were talking about what would be needed for these niches to actually become transformative. Caleb gave his amazing contribution of how materials and input material for production is needed. For example, the seedlings, the importance of financial institutions to invest, the importance of the research perspective from universities and research centers, but we discussed even more about the policy perspective. We said these niches, depending on the context, and this was very much discussed, can be very much bottom-up initiatives when the policymakers and the public managers do not have the intention of growing the local farmers' economy through the communities. I saw my perspective of more, we discussed my perspective of a more bottom-up approach, but also how some policymakers are actually more invested into growing these different communities. So we were talking about this tension between bottom-up and top-down approach, and how in certain cases it can be a challenge of the different objectives that each of the actors have, but in other cases, which was Caleb's case, it's actually a very joint collaboration. So that was pretty much our conversation.
Thank you so much. Yes, so if anyone else
Can I jump in?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think in addition to what Juliana mentioned, it is also important to emphasize managing tensions and, of course, the interest of the actors within the funding system. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So if anyone else wants to contribute from different groups, I'm not sure who was split up into which groups, so I don't have eyes on that. But if anyone else wants a chance now, I'll leave the floor open for a little bit before we move on to the next segment of the session. So yeah, anyone feel free to speak. I can see that, David, thank you for talking to those points that you discussed. Does anyone from David's group want to add anything to that before we move on to the next part? Okay, I'm going to assume no, but please feel free to interrupt me if you do want to say anything. So Phil, yeah, if we can move on to the next segment, if you can introduce that and what we'll be doing and how it's going to affect those interventions and the conversations that we've been having.
Yeah, thanks. And I with the conversation and what David's pointing, what really stood out to me is that the game it reveals different things each time I play it, and here it's tensions or the importance of different roles, I think, and this is something we introduced in later iterations, and how what Juliana and Caleb were talking about in terms of that the tension that can exist between what policymakers might want to do and these community initiatives, and how can sort of a community initiative, for example, not necessarily be co-opted or into a particular vision, and how you need to kind of create those links between business owners, universities, and that multi-dimensional nature of change that we talk about: policy, culture, technology, these kind of things. And I think, yeah, it's important to think about it in a range of dimensions and a range of actors. Now, we're moving on now. Now, I must emphasize that in the game, many things would have happened, and there'd be niches, there would have been consequences, there would have been interventions, and all these kind of things. So again, this is just a snapshot of very particular elements of the game. But one of them in round 2 is shocks, and we talked about shocks before. And these are things that are kind of out of our control that can interrupt the pathway. And they also change the pressures and the demand challenges of our pathway. So we're still working with community agriculture, and the shock that we're going to think about, and it's one we can all think about quite clearly because we've lived through it all, is a global pandemic in the 2030s, another one, and the effects that this would have on the food system, and we think about the systems in general. And remember, we think about whether shocks, on the one hand, they can be disruptive, but maybe they could be a window of opportunity as well that might actually benefit in a roundabout way the niche that we're exploring, like community energy. So if we're thinking about a pandemic like COVID, we can think about some of the effects, operational hurdles that you might want to consider, and then we have to respond to them. Maybe it's labor and volunteer shortages because people have to stay inside, there's restrictions, infrastructure gaps, supply chain insecurity. So a big one that we saw in the early days of COVID was that global food supply chains were kind of seriously disrupted for a while. So there's disruptions, but on the other hand, maybe this can open up windows of opportunity. There might be explosion in demand, there might be, or maybe new things could be tested out to respond to these challenges, digital adoption, focusing on cultures of solidarity and equity. There's many things within this pandemic shock that that affects the operation of the niche, but also presents opportunities for intervening to respond to this shock. So we're going to imagine that we're supporting community-supported energy. We're really keen on this. We're supporting it. That this pandemic happens, food system globally is disrupted, and how are we going to respond to it? So we're going to, again, no right or wrong answer. Don't worry about it. Enjoy the conversation with each other, and we'll just have a chat. So.
Yeah, so you'll be put into breakout groups, and then we'll come back together to chat through what everyone's been talking about. Everyone, welcome back. I hope that was an interesting and useful second part of the exercise. So if you would like to put your conversations or reflections in the chat, you can, or you can just raise your hand and we can come round to you. So this part, we've got 10 minutes now. to before we end, just to discuss. We can discuss the exercise as a whole. We can discuss just this part with the shocks. So is there anyone that would like to kick us off? I know that we had 3 breakout groups. So I mean, we started with Phil's last time. Would it be mean of me to pick on Phil's group again and see if anyone wants to, share some reflections?
I'll jump in actually, since I was the interloper that missed the first one and jumped in on the last. And Phil was just asking a question. I'm Ramy Wood. I'm in Interior Alaska, and just as we were ending that time just then, he was asking a question about some of the role of the technologies with military and with others at these extremes. And I think rather than specifically addressing that, I think with the group as a whole, there is something about the relationships that when we have those shocks, those concussive events, that the extremes allow the relationships that are already built, so that if we have drones or if we use ships or if we use Zoom instead of meeting in person, the tools and the technologies can be seen more imaginative as we support the relationships that are in the built environments themselves. And that's one of the things that, being in Alaska with the extremes, the light, the dark, the temperature extremes, there are new ways of seeing some of these technologies to respond to concussive events like a shock of a pandemic. That's one thing that I'm relationship biased, but we've learned that really helps those webs, be elastic like an earthquake and move with things rather than shake and fall down. So I tried to pack a lot in there. Thank you all for your patience and your work.
Does anyone else from that group want to speak about kinds of conversations you're having, or speak to what Ramy just said?
I mean, I would, if that's okay, because I think it's really great. What happened was that it was a fantastic conversation, despite being very short, because Juliana kicked us off and was pointing out that okay, there's a new demand pressure, and like Ramy is saying, you basically your perception of the technological web can change within this period of shock. And Juliana made the point that this can be a time where you're going to need to deliver food. So we're talking about multiple system coupling. So here we could have a coupling between this agriculture niche and, for example, sustainable transport. And then Caleb added to this in a fantastic way, which was to say, well, what about drones? And and they're an existing technology, but then suddenly you have a kind of accelerated need for this based on this new condition of the demand pressure, which leads on to exactly how Ramy really nicely kind of summed this all up, that these shocks, we can look freshly towards existing technological relationships because new needs open up, which means we can kind of sustain and nurture these technologies and even kind of foster stronger linkages between different systems, between mobility, food, drones, whatever it is. So I really enjoyed the conversation, and it is about, that's why I find the shocks part very interesting all the time, because they are times which are not normal, but we can think of new things. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Great. And yeah, if anyone else from that group wants to jump in, please feel free to. I can see, no, not a hand. Okay, Gilberto, I can see you're still with us. So can I ask you what you discussed in your group, some reflections from you and anyone else that was in your group?
Sure. Well, at the beginning, we were discussing about the topic will be like a pandemic. So we were discussing about maybe in a pandemic, people will change there will be a shift of how people cultivate, maybe each individual can have some kind of crops in their own apartment, for example. But then we were starting to discuss about maybe it will be like an individual shift. So maybe it's better if, for example, each building has their own crop, so it will be like a community kind of way. And then but we were discussing how this could be like sustainable, and maybe we talk about like the government how subsidize a little bit like the buildings, but we were also discussing about, I don't know, cooperatives, how you can create cooperatives to promote like the food consumption in another kind of way because of the pandemic. But I don't know if Marta maybe also wants to talk, or Cynthia or Bernd.
Just to add, there is something that maybe in the context of that kind of shocks, that niche of farmers, and that is very specific, it might change a little bit the way how we see them, right? We see them as this group that is always giving us food, right? They have to provide food, but in that kind of shocks moments, it might be also they can change a little bit the way how we see them as users, and they will be not only they will be the people that have the knowledge, right? So it's a little bit of the change of how the role they have and the play in the niche, and also the socio-technical system, how they change from one role to another. So I think that is something that is also part of the change when you are a user, and also we will be changed as citizens in this case. We will change as well the role, because we will become farmers. So it's kind of a play also in the roles that we will play in that kind of context or world.
Yeah, I like how you're speaking to the cultural, behavioural, psychological changes there, really, which is, of course, a big component of any transition. So thank you. Would anyone from the last group, we've got maybe 2 minutes left, would anyone from the remaining group like to share anything from their discussion? Okay, if not, then Phil, do you have any closing thoughts or remarks for us?
I'd just like to say that thanks for coming, and just to emphasize that what we've done in the last little bits, that these are one amongst sort of many components of the game. So it's just to kind of highlight two particular things, but when you play the game in its entirety, it evolves, and you kind of things happen and relationships happen, and it's I urge you all hopefully it's giving you a taster, but I hope you get the chance to play the game, and do get in touch with us, I think, if you want to explore it further. Yeah, and thanks to Natalie for the leadership, and yeah, I hope we can have more opportunities to get this game out there. So thanks everyone for giving the time to come.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I know it's been quite a long session, so we really appreciate you staying for the whole session, and also participating in that group work, being present with us. It's not always easy online, so thank you for everyone for making the time to do that. And I hope, yeah, you've got something out of both of today's sessions. So if you, you've got the links to the online game. If you need them, if you've got any questions, feel free to email us at the lab. And yeah, just a really big thank you. And it's been great to share the game with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.